Welcome to Job Tales, the podcast where you find dozens of interviews and learn about your potential, future, favorite job. My guest today is Ian Tingen, social scientist at Tingen Industries. In the next 25 minutes, you will learn about Ian's path from his early engineering studies to a postgraduate experience in psychology, with snippets of deep quantitative psych and industrial organization psychology. Ian Tingen, thank you so much because you are staying up late, and I am waking up early. The beauty of globalization. So thank you for being here at my podcast. And I would like to ask you to comment on your title. So you are a social scientist, but you also define yourself as a social scientist.
Yes. And it's a pleasure to be here, Laura. I'm a CEO-social scientist, which is really just a fancy way of saying a management consultant who came into it via entrepreneurship and a background in social and personality psychology. I've been working since graduate school. I've been working for myself one way or another for, oh my goodness, a bit over 10 years now. So yeah, I've got this kind of fusion of entrepreneurial spirit and social and personality psychology, and that's kind of what led me to that title.
Okay.
And it's really easy to search on LinkedIn. So yeah.
Okay, that's a very good point, and that brings me to your. So you're a CEO of your own company. Is it Tingen Industries? Okay,
Correct. Yes.
So what do you do at your company, or what is your company about?
Yeah. So at Tingen Industries, we use social science to ask and answer the most important questions facing individuals, businesses, and society. Right. You know, it's a pretty wide ambit, but that's one of the great things about having a background in psychology, right? Anything that really has to do with human hearts or minds is something that we can touch or work with or improve on. You know, that's kind of what we do.
Mm. And it's interesting use of words. You're talking about industries, and in your new book, for kinds of capital. So there's capital, there's industries. Why this choice of vocabulary?
That's a great question. Mostly because I want to pay attention to the idea that, again, you know, with this background that I have, not everyone is going to come at understanding through this kind of very stuffy academic way of looking at the world. Everyone does have to work, generally speaking, though. and when it comes to, four kinds of capital, right? A lot of people understand at least one kind of capital that they have to deal with, usually financial capital. But, broadening that a little bit, trying to put a lot of this stuff that I learned in my academic teaching and, and now kind of in my applied real world experience, trying to put it in ways that are a lot more accessible for more people. Because fundamentally, that's really what we want to do, is we want to make all this powerful stuff in psychology accessible for as many people as possible.
Yeah. Okay. And can you just briefly tell me what are the four kinds of capital, so that while we're here.
Oh, absolutely. The four kinds of capital are financial. Everyone kind of understands what that is.
Yeah.
Money, instruments to transfer wealth. Then there is psychological capital, which talks about the kind of cognitive, emotional, and experiential capital that we have, grow, and create. There's social capital, which is a really powerful and important kind of capital, the stuff that kind of sticks us together socially and interpersonally, usually grown in the long term, spent in the short term. And then there's the last kind, and in a lot of ways the most important kind, because it's the one that we can't make any more of. That's temporal capital, time.
Temporal, okay, which is limited by definition.
Yeah, limited by definition.
Yeah.
Well, I mean that's the thing, right? Sometimes people like to tell themselves or they get told that, you've got all the time in the world. But I believe that for a lot of people living in this kind of like post worst of the pandemic world, that temporal capital is really the one thing that we should be paying the most attention to, that we don't have infinite amounts of. All of us are on kind of a limited supply, and we don't know how much we've got left. So we should really be taking that into account, whether we're an individual or an institution.
Okay, so yeah, from the moment we are born, there's a countdown, right? On
Hmm.
on time. Is it
Absolutely.
time related to one's life, or is it time related also to other dimensions about life?
There's it's actually a great question. I don't think I've ever had anyone kind of phrase it like that. As far as being related to life, yes, absolutely. It's your life, but it's also kind of the life you have to, kind of live and think and do and be the most effectively that you can, right?
Yeah.
We all have a limited amount of time, but within that amount of time, there's, we're only going to be fully capable and active and brilliant and bright for even a smaller portion of that. So,
Mhm.
really kind of understanding, when we're at our best, how we're at our best, and what we're doing with that time, right?
Right, to be most efficient. I hear you, and it's actually affects a lot. Also, everybody's life and my life as well. When I find myself, in the last 20 years, the pre-social media time, the pre-mobile phone time, and or smartphone time, where I have the impression we had more time, and
Yes.
then now everything is compressed into those same 24 hours. But because we can do so much more, time is compressed, and it kind of becomes a pressure cooker
Hmm.
where you compress it as much as possible. And then I don't know if we do enjoy it by the fact that we can do more,
Hmm.
or whether we should, or our life would be better if we did less but with more quality than quantity. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's kind of why I that's kind of why I wrote the book, kind of why I made the decision deck, right? Is that I think that for every person, every institution, the answer to, should I be doing more? Should I be focusing on quality is a little bit different, right? And at different points in their life, that answer can change, right?
Yeah.
But fundamentally we have to be considering time, right? Instead of
Yes.
just just kind of like hitting the grind, or doing that hashtag grind set thing that so many people seem to be kind of really into. It doesn't really help you consider time, and that's what you fundamentally, in order to take it into consideration, we have to be aware that it's something we should take into consideration.
Totally see the point. So all that is great because it gives us, a nice overview of who you are, where you stand today. Now, going back into your past, what did you do? Like, what, after your teens, what did you know about yourself? Like, what did you know that you would want to do in life?
That's a great question. So
Thank you for
no, it's I reflect on this every so often, and I'm so thankful to have come to this point through this kind of weird and wonderful path that I took, right?
yeah.
In my family, I was the first one to go to college, let alone go to any sort of, PhD program or anything like that. My father was actually an air conditioning mechanic, and my mom was kind of like the secretary for the company, and stayed home, helped take care of me and my sisters. One of the things that I knew that I wanted to do in my teenage years was work really hard with my head. you know Spending a lot of time with my
Okay.
dad working in the Arizona sun. For anyone who's unfamiliar with Arizona here in the US, it's got many, I think we're there at like 130 days above 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
Hmm.
uh and I'm really pale. I know that this is a podcast, but I'm very pale.
Okay.
I am I am not someone who looks like they should be in the desert sun. And so, I got a healthy respect for doing manual labor, and I learned a lot of wonderful people skills, being out there working with my dad. But I knew that I wanted to do something with my brain more than I did with my hands. Not because there was anything wrong with manual labor, but because I just was constantly fascinated by the world and all sorts of cool things that were happening. And I loved trying to understand how things worked. And that's eventually what led me into electrical and computer engineering for my first major at my first
Mm.
university. I think, as we were talking about a little bit before the
Mhm.
show, that's not where I ended up.
Mhm.
Um, if it's okay to tell a little bit of that story about how I actually
Yeah.
kind of came to psychology. So I like to tell people that I got into psychology because I got caught in my first riot in Tucson, Arizona in the spring of 2001. Like I said, I was an electrical and computer engineering major, and was doing that. But the school that I went to, University of Arizona, for the first my first freshman year, had this great basketball program. It was a very well known school, Point Guard U. Lots of great NBA players have come out of U of A. Anyway, the freshman year that I was there, they were in the NCAA men's final, and in Tucson, they're a big basketball town around the U, and so everyone watches the game. And long story short, U of A loses, right? And the game was televised, and I got to
Big tragedy.
well, no, really a big tragedy. What I would come to find out was a big tragedy, right?
Yeah.
Because I in the game afterwards, like everyone kind of shuffled out into this area downtown, the kind of the hip area with like the bars and where all the college kids hung out, that sort of place. What eventually unfolded there across probably like 4 or 5 hours after the game was that a gathering of people that was a little bit feisty ended up turning into some people taking down like a light pole and flipping a car here or there, uh, which then invited a police presence that this kind of amplified over time, and I got caught in the middle of it. Like by the time I realized what was going on and I was trying to leave the area, everything had kind of been barricaded in. Like you couldn't like get off the side streets or anything. I'd try and go off and there'd be a barrier up and police telling me to go back towards the throng of people that were getting more and more agitated. About halfway through this, while I'm just like literally hiding off on this side street in behind like a semi trailer, there's another woman that's hiding there, and we're like, oh, hey, you look like you're sane, and yeah, you look like you're sane. We're not part of that mess. Let's try and avoid that. It turns out that she was a reporter for the Associated Press, and she was like, oh man, I was just here to cover the game and like the crowd sentiment, and it's turned into this. I'm like, wow, it's a hell of a scoop you're about to have here. We end up in this parking lot eventually trying to avoid everything, and there's a news van, one of those satellite trucks that they have that broadcast on site. And while we're looking around for our next place to go, the back door of this van just opens up, and this guy just like, hey, come on, you two over here, right? And so we scurry over and we get into the back of the van, and the guy closes the door, and there's a few people in there, right? Like a couple of producers. And then this woman who I notice is, she's an anchor on the local nightly news, right? And she must have like, okay, she must have been deployed on site. And she's usually this very composed and this very, this very news-like figure, right? And she is cursing up a storm. And,
Okay.
and she's I noticed that her legs have a little bit of blood on them, and her tights are a little bit shredded, and it's because there was a concussion grenade, they had said, had been kind of tossed towards them and had like thrown gravel up from the parking lot into her legs while they were trying to record like an on-site like live report.
So that made you, yeah.
Yeah,
so that made you feel like, why do people act like this?
Why do people act like this? How do we have so much happening in such a short period of time where, I've gone from this, kind of sleepy college town that's really passionate about sports to cursing news anchor in a van with people that I've never ever met in my life who are coming together to shelter me and each other. There were so many things that happened in such a rapid space of time. I wanted to understand how people worked more than anything in that. And that's what kind of set me on the trajectory that I've been on since.
Okay. So, and then in the meantime, you were in your engineering years. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So what did you do? Did you just quit the engineering studies?
Yeah, pretty much.
Much to the delight of your parents?
Well, it was interesting, right? Because one of the other things that kind of pushed me in the direction of psychology was I enjoyed doing the engineering work, right? But one of the other things was I had mentioned I was the first one in my family to go to college, and something that I was understanding at that point in my life was that I had not necessarily been acculturated to understand that part of the world, right? I had this very kind of
Mm.
working class mentality, which again, there is absolutely nothing wrong with, but it's not something that everyone who goes to college has, and it's not something that everyone kind of understands culturally. So, I had gone from being in the top end of my high school classes, top like 3% of students or whatever, to getting into this really great honors program, and essentially being very politely asked to leave the program at the end of
Oh.
my first year, because I was doing the classwork, but it wasn't, not everything was clicking for me culturally. So there was something else that was, on a personal level. It's like, well, why? Like, I was told college was this and this, but it's really this and this. And like, I just didn't have the kind of the cultural training, the acculturation, the mindset at that point in my
Hmm.
life. And so, actually when my first year ended, I think it was the best thing for everyone that I was leaving that particular program in that particular school. My parents said, well, what trade are you going to learn? And I said, I'm not. And they said,
Oops.
well, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I'll figure it out. And so, I just worked in a number of different jobs at that point. It took a few years to kind of figure out what kind of acculturation I did need, figure out what I really wanted to be doing. And that's what led me back to psychology. But in the interim, I worked in everything from property management to banking to kind of event production. I was in a bunch of terrible punk and metal bands for a hot
Oh, yeah.
minute. Yeah. Um, so
Interesting.
did a lot of exploration.
It sounds like a lot like my kind of life, my my professional past. Also trying to explore, and this is why I do the podcast. It's to help others, especially the young people, really get a sample of what's out there, but from a personal perspective. Like what can I do professionally? Then and then everybody's path is different, but also not one path is right or wrong. So
Hmm.
it's about your personal journey to what you want to become, and actually you are already what you're becoming, in my
Hmm.
opinion. So it's
Hmm.
when looking at your punk gear or, working in a property management or events, and tell me what you think. But it's kind of helping build who you are and giving you skills that maybe you might have not gained had you just studied engineering or had you just studied social science. What is your experience in that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a process, right? Living in the world of work and living as an individual, I find that it's best lived as a constant process, and not one that is understood as stagnant, right? And so,
Mm,
bouncing around through different academic programs, bouncing around through different jobs, I saw that as a process of learning about myself and creating myself, right? every
yeah.
every job that I had, every different class that I took, I tried to see it as not only me doing work for pay or me learning about a new subject, but using it as a way to kind of reflect on, well, what do I think about this? How does this make me think about my place in the world? How does this make me think about existing differently, right? What can I
Hmm.
learn? What can I see? What can I know? And I know that not everyone is built for that, and that's totally fine. But for me, every new endeavor that I undertook was essentially another mirror that got me to illuminate another angle of existing, right? So
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned social science, so I know about your engineering studies and you mentioned psychology. So did you study further? Like, did you do social science studies with psychology, or are you
yeah.
self-learned?
Yeah, so my formal schooling was, the engineering, and then when I went back to school, I eventually settled on psychology and sociology for kind of my undergraduate degrees, and then I went to a PhD program in social and personality psychology
Okay.
with a minor in quantitative psych. So kind of that nerdy stats methods stuff, which is so cool in so many ways.
Wow.
Yeah. And then of course when I came into the world of work, the thing that I like to say is that, go through my PhD training, and then I had to get a whole nother PhD worth of training outside
Mm.
of the university
What?
to understand how to apply all of that very esoteric theory and all of that kind of like really well developed, decades long set of studies and ideas, and figure out how to make it matter to the outside world. Right. So yeah, there's a difference between theory and application.
An
um
application.
yeah.
Quantitative psych, can you just briefly mention, what is it?
Yeah, quantitative psych. I mean, and please, anyone else out there who's got like a quant background, don't kill me for being reductive with the field. But long story short, quantitative psych is kind of the way that we take human thoughts, beliefs, behaviors, and feelings, and turn them into kind of essentially numbers and things that we can measure, ways that we can kind of understand and quantify
Mm.
those things in the quest to kind of describe, explain, and predict behavior, thoughts, feelings, emotions, things like that. So yeah, how do you take an
Okay.
emotion? How do you take an action? How do you turn it into a number? And how do you understand that number in a meaningful way towards a meaningful end?
How does it relate to behavioral science or behavioral economics, for example?
It's kind of like it behavioral it does not exist in its modern form without that
Okay.
quantitative angle, right? It is really the
Hmm.
foundation of
It's a
of
foundation. Okay.
mhm.
Fantastic. Yeah. Okay. Though, so you've done all your studies, even more, more so. And when did you start actually practicing? Did you go straight into being independent with your Tingen Industries, or were you working for someone else?
That's a great question. So I kind of got my start working on things. I had this really fantastic advisor in my undergraduate time, a guy named Greg Neidert. And Greg was someone who taught at the university, taught industrial organizational psychology, but he also had a company on the side. And one of the things that he did that I will be forever appreciative of was he encouraged his students to look for like contracts and RFPs and things that we could use our skills on. Right. And so I
Hmm.
actually, through one of his classes and through his guidance, ended up getting a small contract with a couple of friends of mine where we did some research for the Arizona Motor Vehicle Division. And I did this as
Hmm.
an undergraduate, and Neidert kind of showed us how to apply for it and get through the entire process, and we got it. So my first experience actually was before I had any sort of credential. Right, it's when I was in this wonderful kind of supervised capacity at Arizona State. And then afterwards, I kind of started Tingen Industries on the side while I was in graduate school to
Okay.
start picking up like consulting gigs or whatever would come my way. I didn't know exactly what it was going to be, but I did
Yeah.
know that psychology was really cool and can do so much for so many different organizations and industries. So I kind of started, and
Mm.
then right out of grad school, I had a job that was doing actually environmental behavioral consulting. And then after that, I went into entertainment, but I always had Tingen Industries on the side.
Okay.
After that entertainment job, then I kind of started doing the Tingen Industries stuff and other companies that I started more full time.
Okay. And now you do full time in Tingen Industries. Okay.
Hmm.
Awesome. Because time is running. What are your? I have so many more questions, but I guess what have you learned along the way? That maybe the younger crowd could be benefiting from. To save some time and maybe sorrows.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's two things that have been really key. Number one is to understand that there is a difference between knowing something and being influential with it, right? A lot of times people who go through a kind of a more theoretically heavy training, get this idea. It's like, oh, well, I know how these things work. And so it's great. And I can just take that out there and like, I'll tell people how things work and it'll be perfect. No, that's,
Okay.
that's not how it works necessarily, right? You have to not only be able to understand why things work, but you also have to be able to assess, how that message will be received in the world. You have to understand how to tell that story in a meaningful and compelling way, and you also have to understand that not everyone is going to want to hear that story. And so it's for anyone who's going to be taking this kind of approach to the world, be sure to craft not only your knowledge, but be sure to understand the importance of storytelling and influence, and when and where to push on that power. Number one. And number two, and this is something I think is going to be really, really important going forward into a future that AI is going to help shape, is that the approach of centering the end user in everything you think about and do and design is so important, right? Centering your ideas about trying to understand when people use my product, when people use my service, when people use this thing that I'm helping design, like what is their experience going to be with it, and mastering that relationship and building from there, instead of treating it as like a secondary outcome to a profit margin or a minimum viable product.
Great remark, great suggestion. Anything else you would like to say in the last 30 seconds of our interview?
Thank you so much. I wish we had another half hour to talk. This has been fantastic. And, anyone who's out
Same
there,
here.
anyone who's out there who's thinking about going it on their own, don't be afraid of doing that. And don't be afraid of seeing your path to wherever you're going as a complete path. It's okay to get out there. It's okay to do things. It's okay to try them. It's okay to fail. And it's okay to succeed. Just embrace it all, because that's what you really need to build a successful future.
And on that note, I thank you very much for your contribution. Thank you, Ian.
Of course. My pleasure.
And on that note, let me end with much happiness, as in 1 minute, Ian summarized the essence of my podcast. Don't be afraid to explore, embrace it all, see your path to wherever you're going as a complete path. It's okay to try things, it's okay to fail, and it's okay to succeed. Rendezvous to next week. Ciao for now.